Hello, we are the Brothers Mahoney. This is Michael.
And I am James.
And today we are here to discuss the very first episode and story of Doctor Who, An Unearthly Child, which was written by Anthony Coburn and broadcast November to December 1963 in 4 episodes.
It almost goes without saying, but in case you have somehow been under a rock for almost 60 years, this first episode goes as follows. 2 teachers follow a mysterious student home to a police box, and the doctor takes them on a short excursion back to 200,000 BC. At least that's what it says on the DVD box. It never actually says anywhere in the story that it's 200,000 BC.
It actually doesn't technically clarify it takes place on Earth, but
that's true. And furthermore, it's most certainly not a short excursion. I mean, it's one of the most traumatizing adventures I've ever seen in Doctor Who.
and it really is. So only Doctor Who up to the 25th story, which was the Grandfathers. Each of these stories, of course, made up of multiple episodes. Each episode in the story had an individual title. So In An Unearthly Child is actually the name of the first episode of the story. The other 3 episodes, of course, being The Cave of Scars, The Forest of Fear, and The Firemaker. And actually, this story has been known under other names too, but In An Unearthly Child is, I would imagine, by far the most common name for the story as a whole.
Yeah, it's the one that stuck. I believe, was it one of the other names, 200,000 BC?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, but it's the one that stuck, and eventually it just became codified as the official name for the collection of episodes as a whole.
And it's also worth mentioning that we'll sort of be tackling this review somewhat differently than we have previous stories, because the first episode feels significantly different than the last 3 episodes. And I know for some people out there, that's a bit of a complaint they might have of this story. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But because of that, we're probably going to be focusing first on, of course, to the first episode and then on the following 3.
But before we even get to the episode in of itself, there is the first time the Doctor Who theme has been enjoyed with the classic version from 1963. This is, of course, the first of many Doctor Who themes, and it was replaced with the theme from the Macro era in the Second Doctor era. But this was the very first one. And one of my favorite things about the theme, besides, of course, how classic it is that it's what I would call the extended version of the theme. If you ever watched any Sylvester McCoy stories, you know that the main theme was still there, but in the theme song, they had an extended portion of the theme. I am not the music person. I can't explain the instruments or whatnot, or what style it was in. It's just a nice kind of atmospheric, extended intro. And I really, for me personally, the Sylvester McCoy era is my favorite theme song, which I know is not the most popular of theme songs out there.
But visually speaking, it can be a bit hideous.
Well, no, but I like the visuals. They've grown on me. Not only does it have the extended theme, which I really enjoy, the extended theme actually starts playing over the episode. Most episodes, of course, most stories have the song stop, and then the episode goes as it goes. But because it uses the extended theme, it plays a bit over the episode, and it plays over a very atmospheric, foggy scene of a British beat cop. Just, again, he's walking through the fog. It's very mysterious, as Susan says. And he's just walking down an old junkyard, and the music's just still playing. It's a good, minute? At least a minute before we actually see anything besides this. The camera goes into the junkyard that the police officer was, just walking by. And we just, see around the junkyard. It's very dark. Everything's broken down. And we just see this strange-looking police box just in the junkyard. And then the scene cuts and it goes. I suppose it might be the next night. Maybe it's that same night. I'm not sure. But then the scene cuts and we're on to something else. I think it's a very atmospheric way to start the episode. Very moody.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think it's a really nice opening. Very atmospheric. And it just adds to a little bit of the, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine what it would be like living, in the British 1960s, since, I was born in the USA in 1993. So I don't have the frame of reference. But just tuning onto your TV in November 1963 to watch a series that is, who knows what's going to happen. It's such an interesting idea to think of, and I have to imagine that opening helped allow people to be pulled in even more.
Yeah, it would have been quite the experience to have been just one of the people who got to enjoy Doctor Who when it very first aired. So after we get the atmospheric scene to open it out, we go to a school. It doesn't matter at all, but I just love the very first thing we see in this school is these kids come out of a classroom. These two girls start talking to each other. This one guy comes out of nowhere, says something to them, walks away, and the other girls just start, like rolling their eyes or whatever he said. I have no idea what's there. I have no idea if they, had any idea of, what was sad. I just think it's funny. Just the look on, their faces after the guy walks away. That's just one of those things that always amused me. But after that, we get to meet our characters, starting with the two teachers, and among the very first companions we get to enjoy in the series, Ian Chesterton, who is a science teacher at Carole School, which of course is the school that we later see Clara teach at for some reason, although I never did quite understand when she became a teacher. But that's a conversation for then. And as her history teacher, Barbara Wright, played by Jacqueline Hale, and if I didn't mention it, Ian was played by William Russell.
And we see these two teachers discussing a mysterious student, or at least mysterious to them, named Susan, who at times seems to know a bit more than what might be expected, and at other times seems somewhat oblivious to the natures of the reality she lives in.
And that might seem dramatic, but apparently she doesn't even know what type of money system they used at the time, which doesn't usually happen. Even if you were like me and didn't have any money when you were younger, I still knew what money, we used. So
yeah, and what's interesting, if you've seen a lot of modern Doctor Who and maybe even a couple of classic Doctor Who episodes or stories like Genesis of the Daleks or the Macra
or City of Death. I don't know why I would see the Macra before City of Death, but continue.
Indeed, Macra for the win. But this is sort of interesting for Doctor Who. Of course, it's the first episode. They're still trying to get a hang on what they want to do. But there's multiple flashbacks in this episode as both Ian and Barbara discuss Susan.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I don't personally recall Doctor Who ever doing again until the Revival series started. I don't remember any flashbacks in any Classic Who season or Classic Who series besides this story. Do you?
I have a feeling like it must have been something, but I'm only saying there must have been something because there's so much material between 63 and 89.
But yeah, but the thing is, I don't think there was something.
Yeah, I really don't know. But nothing immediately comes to mind, and this is, I think, one of the most striking things about this first episode.
Yeah, and of course, as you can tell by the way we're laying it out, the very first episode is portrayed as a mystery. We're not following the perspective of the Doctor on an adventure like what you usually expect. Maybe if you've seen, some Doctor Who. But no, we're just watching these two school teachers try to figure out the mystery of this student of theirs.
And much like the whole issue in which she doesn't know what currency they're currently using at the time, she also has a very deep understanding of science, which of course Ian found somewhat frustrating.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. Among Ian's first lines in the episode are basically saying that she knows more science than he'll ever know. And she's supposed to be just like a 15-year-old girl. And he's, of course, the teacher.
And it sort of snowballs into Ian and Barbara wanting to find out more about her. Because before this conversation, Barbara actually wanted to go to her home, go to Susan's home, and try to convince Susan's grandfather, who they know as a doctor, to take a deeper interest in Susan's studies. But when Barbara goes to the address the school provided for Susan, it just leads to a junkyard. That's where the address goes, and it's a mystery that Barbara has taken an interest in figuring out. And luckily for her, Ian also has an interest in this too.
Yeah, I guess one thing we didn't mention before, and it's everybody knows, but I'll just throw a mention in anyway. The first two Doctors, their entire eras were in black and white. And it just, to me, gives it a more classy, kind of a classy feel to the first two Doctors. I'm not saying it makes the stories better, but I've always just, enjoyed taking a step back and watching these two doctors because of the black and white nature of them. And I think Ian especially looks great in black and white. I mean, he's not wearing an amazing suit or anything, but he looks good in what he's wearing. Of course, it's 1960s, school teacher. You're going to, look good. And he looks really good in this episode. Wow. In this episode alone, not so much the later ones, as you'll see what happens in this story.
And perhaps in one of the more memorable scenes in the first half of the episode, Barbara brings Susan a book on the French Revolution for Susan to read. And of course, Susan says, "Oh, I'll return it tomorrow." "Oh, you can finish it first." "Oh, it will be done by then." But Susan gets a book on the French Revolution, and once Barbara and Ian leaves the room, she sort of flips through the book. And she's like, "No, that's not right. That's not what happened."
Yeah, it's a bit on the nose, but they needed to set up the premise, and they only had like 23 minutes to do it. So I guess you kind of make things as on the nose as possible, while it still works in story. One thing I always found amusing about this scene was it's a 1960s prep. The book on the French Revolution is this hardcover book with it has a dust jacket. On the dust jacket is the title of the book. It is amazingly entitled The French Revolution. There are no pictures, no great pictures of the rich getting guillotined, which I suppose might have been a bit controversial, although, it's the French Revolution, why not? Just the French Revolution in the cheapest looking book I have ever seen. We have a lot of history books. I don't know if we have any history book that is as simple as the Civil War.
Especially ones that don't list an author on front.
Oh, that's also true. Yeah, that's even list an author on the very front of the book. That doesn't happen.
From there, we see Ian and Barbara sort of following Susan home.
Well, not quite following. They already know where she supposedly lives, so they just kind of beat her home, basically. They offer to give her a ride, but she enjoys walking through the dark because, as she says, it's mysterious.
We do get a whole lot of character from Susan at the beginning because we're sort of in the same shoes as both Ian and Barbara are. She's just a sort of mysterious young girl. So just the line, "Oh, I like walking through the dark. It's mysterious." It just adds to the charm. And I think it should also be said that Susan is played by Carole Ann Ford, and I think she does a really good job with this role.
Yes, she does do a very good job with the role. She was not always one of my favorite companions, but I mean, with the material she was given, she played the role pretty well.
Ian and Barbara watch Susan enter a junkyard, the same junkyard, of course, that her address is. And Ian suggests perhaps that maybe she's just meeting a boy. And Barbara almost hopes that is the case because that would be so normal and this mystery would be over. But of course, the mystery is not that easy. They go into the junkyard after her.
But you're missing the very best part. Right before that, Barbara has this great line. Apparently she has some precognition abilities because she says, "I feel frightened, as if we're about to interfere in something that is best left alone." But Ian, it was the 1960s, most male characters wore at this time, was a bit slightly chauvinistic and just said, "Oh, don't worry about that, come on, let's get going." Completely ignores, to be fair, there's not much you can do with that statement. They were already there, they wanted to know what Susan was up to. But I just thought that line was amusing and very dramatic, considering what is about to happen to them.
And once we see them onto the junkyard, they're looking for Susan, of course. They can't find her. They, of course, see an old police box that seems to be vibrating. Ian even says it's alive. And boy, is it. But they still can't find Susan, but they do run into a somewhat older gentleman who is not exactly the most helpful in the pursuit.
Yeah, he is not helpful in the slightest. And if you've only ever seen New Who, or even some of the more popular classic Who with Tom Baker, maybe some Peter Davison, maybe some John Pertwee, you've never seen a doctor quite like the one we get to experience in An Unearthly Child. He is cantankerous. He's pretty rude. If you thought Colin Baker's rude, he's about on that same level of rudeness. He's very, very condescending to Ian and Barbara. And maybe not condescending, but he doesn't exactly treat Susan amazingly well either at some points. He is not the man that he's grown into, or woman that he has grown into, that we know and love today.
Yes, because Barbara and Ian ask this gentleman, hey, have you seen, a young girl? Have you seen this girl around the junkyard? And he's just completely unwilling to assist them. And there's a line like, oh, I don't understand your attitude. And the doctor replies, well, yours leaves a lot to be desired, young man.
Yeah, the first Doctor insults Ian and Barbara constantly. At first, he mostly downplays who he is. They're looking for Susan in the junkyard. They think she's in there somewhere. They know she's in there somewhere. And then they just run into this old guy who, because he doesn't, of course, want any humans involved, just tries to, do what he can to ignore them. It's looking at random items around the junkyard, looking at the quality, and basically just ignoring Ian and Barbara. They're saying, won't you help us? And the doctor's like, oh, no, I don't think so. It's not really any of my business. And he's just the most unhelpful you could imagine. And eventually, they hear Susan calling from what we know to be the TARDIS. The doctor literally manhandles Ian to try to stop him from entering. He doesn't quite tackle him because he's a bit older, but it's close to that idea. And then Ian and Barbara enter the TARDIS, and what I think is still a rather beautiful scene.
Yeah, I think it is quite a striking scene. Barbara walks in to what looks like a normal police box, and of course she is hit with the alien side of a very large room of the TARDIS Council. And it's all done in what, in my opinion, is a pretty smooth take. I think if I had been in the audience back there in the 60s watching this, you're just in a sort of dingy, dark junkyard, and boom, you're walking into a room with, it looks pristine, it looks very alien, especially given what we were just looking at before.
Especially considering that it's a lot bigger than it has any right to be.
Yeah, and I think it's just that first introduction to the TARDIS, I think, is really done well.
Yeah, and this is where the doctor gets truly condescending, because Ian, he's a science teacher. He wants to understand the idea behind it. And the doctor is basically, I almost want to quote him because he's being a bit impolitic, but he's comparing Ian to the, quote, rad Indian who didn't understand how locomotives worked.
Yeah, that's not going to be the last time that the doctor says something that might be badly laughed in the 60s.
Yeah, nonetheless, it's not too much of a stain in his character, but there's some of that there.
And it's something that I just wouldn't think the doctor would say. I mean, it's not like he's a student of Earth. He generally seems like he doesn't care that much about humans. He just wants to do his own thing. It's more something that I would think Susan would maybe think about, but probably never say. It just seems like it seems so strange to me coming from the doctor.
Yeah, to me, it's just it was written in the 60s. Maybe the doctor at that point had read some human history. I mean, what else do you think he does all day, honestly?
I mean, aside from hiding Hands of Omega, I'm not really sure what his daily schedule looks like.
That's probably a one-off thing. I don't know exactly when we're going to get there, but that is true. He did do that. But yeah, it's written in the 60s in the BBC. It's not like it was a very racially sensitive time in public broadcasting in that era. So I really blame the BBC more for that than I do with the first Doctor. But anyway, so he's just condescending, and we aren't going through the whole argument they get into. But at one point, the Doctor says that they are wanderers from the fourth dimension and they are exiles.
Yeah, apparently they are exiles cut off from their own planet. Now, they don't name the planet, and I'm actually trying to remember when they first say the word Gallifrey in Doctor Who. Was it sometime during Potter's time, or is it the end of Troughton's, or is it not even until Tambegi? I really don't know.
Honestly, I have a feeling it could have been as late as Tambegi, but I would guess it might have been during Potter's time.
Like I said, they're still trying to work out the kinks of the story, trying to figure out exactly what they're doing.
Oh, actually, I was right. It is the Pottery era. Apparently, it was in the Time Warrior, which is a pretty damn good story.
And of course, that is also the first appearance of the Centaurans.
And Sarah Jane Smith.
Yeah, she is mildly more important, but they don't eat screaming popcorn, so. And if you don't understand that reference, no idea if we'll ever get to it, but be ready, guys. Anyhow, one thing that the Doctor says, and I always like this line just because I think it's a good show of his attitude, his sort of grouchy attitude. He mentions that when they're in a machine, well, he calls it a ship, and he mentions it can not only move in space, but it can also move in time. And Ian, again, he's a science teacher, and he is somewhat incredulous of this. And the Doctor says, I tolerate this century, but I don't enjoy it. And that line always sort of cracked me up.
Yeah, this is not the Doctor who loves humanity. This is not the fourth Doctor who thinks humanity is indomitable. This isn't the 10th Doctor who would war with the Master across the galaxy as long as he left Earth alone. This is a Doctor who doesn't even like the century that he happens to be in at this point. He has no respect for humanity, seemingly out beyond the fact that he thinks they should be allowed to exist, it seems.
Ian and Barbara, after they figure out that, hey, we're not going to be able to convince Susan that this is all just an illusion, they are just going to leave. They're just going to, hey, this has been some interesting night. Let's go home and talk about it. That is not though what is in the cards, because as the Doctor says, the question is, what are we going to do with you?
Yeah, if you've ever seen a first Doctor story, William Hartnell had a verbal tick. You say, every now and then, and it's just very noticeable, and I laugh at it. I really do laugh at it.
One thing I laugh about the Doctor is how he just abducts people.
Well, this is true. Basically,
yeah, if you've seen Modern Who, Rose was quite interested in traveling with the Doctor. Martha wanted to travel with the Doctor.
Was there anyone in Modern Who traveled with the Doctor who didn't want to?
Yeah, Ryan, Graham, and Yaz.
Oh yeah, that's true, and yet.
But it doesn't matter because they weren't characters. It's okay. Aside from them, though, I think most of the companions I can think of in Modern Who, and even in most classic Who, of course, at least the companions I know, wanted to travel with the Doctor.
Well, Ban and Polly didn't.
No, but they had fun in the end. I mean, they got to meet the Macra. That's called fun.
Well, I suppose we would call meeting the Macra fun. I'm not sure they would agree. But yeah, no, so the Doctor does basically just abduct these two. Now, I'm not sure what his actual plan was, because the only reason the TARDIS traveled anywhere was because the Doctor was trying to basically trick Susan into staying with him, because he said that if he let Ian and Barbara go, then he would have to go. And Susan, really likes this. She likes the civilization. She didn't want to go. So the Doctor says, "Oh, well, then you must go with them. There's no other way, child." Because again, the Doctor's condescending. And of course, Susan, being his granddaughter, well, she may be 90. For Time Lords, that's nothing. She's around. I think she's in her 90s. I don't remember. It's probably some extended media that says that. But so she just screams, "Oh, grandfather, no!" She basically runs into the TARDIS, hits some buttons, and then we get a very trippy first TARDIS dematerialization. We don't see them go through a time vortex. We just see it's kind of a lot like what the theme song is. The waves that pop up during the theme song. That's kind of what we see the TARDIS go through. And it looks like it's not quite instantaneous, because we're seeing looks on the Doctor's face, we're seeing looks on Ian's face, Barbara's face, as this transition is happening. And then we have the great ending to episode 1, where we see the TARDIS just land, or just materialize in this desert-looking area, and we see the shadow of this humanoid shape just on the sand right in front of it, and then the credits roll.
Yeah, so it's a very striking first episode. I think it does a lot of things right. And moving on to the rest of the story, and like I said, a lot of people tend to not think as much about the last 3 episodes of the story. But it's almost a preview of what we're going to be expecting from Doctor Who, because it's a whole political subplot going on between an old Neanderthal tribe trying to deal with making fire.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing about classic Who that maybe some people don't remember as much is that a good half, maybe even as much as 3/4, maybe not that high, of these stories had politics as a minor or sometimes even major subplot. I mean, it might not seem like much, but at these last 3 episodes, we have the son of somebody who could make fire. Again, as Michael said, we're back now, hypothetically 200,000 BCE, around there. So we're having a Neanderthal tribe, but they're humanoids, so they're not quite Neanderthals. They're basically like the Flintstone cavemen. That's basically what they are. The leader of this tribe is the son of somebody who used to be able to make fire, who died. He is trying to make fire, but he has been unable to figure out how to do it. He's trying to rub sticks together. It's not quite working. Honestly, the scenes where he's trying to make fire are absolutely hilarious. There's a section in this in the second episode that's just a basically political debate between him and an outsider of the tribe who they brought into the tribe, who they saved, who is trying to become leader of the tribe because he's doing all the hunting. He's giving them all the meat. And at one point, the son of the fire maker says, I will keep you warm. I will make you fire. I will go out and hunt the meat. And they will force to keep you warm. And then someone else replies, I say tomorrow you will sit here and rub sticks together, and the animals, the bears, will stay warm in their own force.
Yeah, it's possible that maybe a lot of the material may not be quite as interesting as the first episode, but there's still plenty of snappy dialogue in the last couple of episodes.
Yeah, there's not quite the same politics you'll get in later episodes, like the power of Carole, like the mutants, even in Gallifrey-centric ones, like the Invasion of Time or the Deadly Assassin. But it's still political. That's what it comes down to, it's politics.
Yeah, so I think a lot of strong things in these last 3 episodes that some people, if they've maybe only watched this story once, or maybe they've only watched the first episode and just ignored the rest of the story, that's sometimes the way that some people approach the first Doctor Who story. But they might forget, or they may not realize, that there's actually, I think, a lot of strong points in these last 3 episodes. For instance, Ian pretty much has a mental breakdown for like a third of the episode. He is once the TARDIS lands and he's convinced that they haven't moved. He thinks, this is just a trick that the Doctor and Susan are playing. And then once he goes outside and sees, hey, they're not in the junkyard anymore, he pretty much breaks down for a bit.
Yeah, it's not a historical breakdown. He just sits down. He's not quite non-responsive, but you can tell that he's like looking around. He's seeing the sights. This is a reaction that you would expect. Everything he understands about, how time works, about how space works, that's just gone. And he's trying to, reel his mind back in to a new understanding of how reality works.
And it makes sense because he's a science teacher. He thought he had at least relatively okay understanding of the world he lived in, and he comes to find out that he did not. And it's just not his day.
It really isn't. Although, to be fair, it's no one's day, because this was one hell of a brutal story at this point.
Yeah, and it gets set up. Like I said, we're not going scene by scene, but it sets up. The Doctor is walking around, and he decides to smoke a pipe, which is something that we have never seen again. But hey, this Doctor enjoys a gold pipe every once in a while. And that, of course, leads to the whole action of the story, because obviously as he's smoking this pipe, the shadow that we mentioned sees the fire. He sees fire, and the Tripesian can't make fire. So he actually abducts the Doctor with the idea of forcing him to make them fire. He believes the fire comes from his hands, like he was sent from the orb. Of course, the orb being the sun. Because, of course, these are primitive people, and they have not managed the art of rubbing sticks to get fire going yet.
I mean, one of them understands the idea that that's how it happens, but they haven't been able to actually manage the fire. They were close eventually.
Oh, they would have been screwed if they relied on that guy. But
the interesting thing about this is, in at least my opinion, there's a political subversion, because the way it's being set up is, I thought we were supposed to be rooting for the outsider of the tribe, the one who had, as I said earlier, done all the hunting, who kept the people fed in the tribe. I would never thought we were supposed to be quote unquote rooting for the guy who just sits around all day rubbing sticks together. And
actually,
he's not perfect. Like neither of these sides are great, but in the end, we tend to be more sympathetic towards him.
Yeah, we tend to be more sympathetic towards him. I don't think either side's actually the quote-unquote good side. Both sides were going to either kill the doctor or keep him locked up for, well, years. So really, in this story, I don't think we're supposed to root for either the fire maggot or the hunter. I think we're just supposed to root for the doctor, or really more Barbara and Ian.
Yeah, and as I said before, this is a really brutal story because the doctor is, of course, kidnapped. Then Susan, Barbara, and Ian are also taken captive, and they are thrown into the Cave of Skulls, which is a cave, literally, well, of skulls. All around them in this cave are just skulls that have been crushed in with a hatchet swing. Like, they're just surrounded by bones of people this tribe has killed. Now, I don't know how the tribe has run into so many people, but there were a lot of skulls around, so they are apparently running into some. And eventually, with somebody's help, they make an escape. And during this escape, Barbara basically has a breakdown, and her breakdown is hysterical.
Yeah, and episode 3, which is titled The Forest of Fear, I think has to be one of the darkest episodes of Doctor Who. I need to clarify, I need to rewatch a lot of Doctor Who. I haven't seen everything, and I've not listened to everything. But it has to be among one of the darkest episodes of Doctor Who in existence. Because not only is it an extraordinarily tense chase scene, it's a really dark episode of it all. I mean, there's a famous scene in this episode when, as they are being chased, the individual who is chasing them gets gored by an animal. And of course, Ian and Barbara, despite the fact that they were being chased by this individual, they want to go out and help him because they're kind people. The doctor has no interest in doing this. In fact, he thinks you're crazy for doing it, which is, again, so unlike the doctor we know. But as they are trying to help this guy, get him to drink some water, clean out his wounds, the doctor makes a move to grab a rock. And while it's not necessarily explicitly stated, the doctor looks like he was about to use the rock to smash it into the heart of this wounded guy to theoretically kill him so they can all get back to the TARDIS and into safety.
Yeah, it never quite says outright that the doctor is going to kill the guy with the rock, but that's what's implied, and it's again not the most doctorly action you could imagine him taking.
And that itself is dark enough, but then we get to what has to be one of my favorite cliffhangers of the whole story, the end of episode 3, in which Ian and Barbara and Susan and the doctor do almost make it back to the TARDIS. The TARDIS is in their sights, but just before they can actually get there, all these tribesmen pop up from behind trees and behind rocks, and again, the doctor and his people are trapped.
Yeah, they are captive for a good half of this story, it seems like. I think it's about half. A lot of episode 2 and a lot of episode 4.
Which I think is a good thing, actually, because it does lead to an extraordinarily solid line in which the doctor seems to be afraid at this specific time. Their hands and their ankles are tied together and they're trying to escape. Yeah, and as the doctor is trying to work with these others to get themselves untied, Barbara's sort of surprised because up to this point the doctor's been, a dick. Barbara's surprised and like, hey, you're trying to help us? And the doctor says, fear makes a companion of us all. And that is how history is made.
Yeah, that seems to canonically be the first usage of the word companion, and I'm not sure if that's where the usage of companion comes from in terms of the people who the doctor travels with, but I like to think it is.
And of course it does take them a couple of more stories before the doctor can really see Barbara and Ian as more friendly acquaintances as opposed to almost being antagonistic forces. So it does take a little while for them to get to that relationship. They're not there yet, but at least at this point they're able to work together.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is, as you might be able to expect, Ian is put more in the hero role than the doctor is at this point, because Ian's a strapping young lad. Well, I guess maybe not that young, but compared to the doctor, he's fairly young. He's a strong guy, and he does a lot of the action stuff that, of course, the Doctor wouldn't be able to do. He's what Harry Sullivan was supposed to be if they had cast a Doctor who was older than Tom Baker. And again, one of the reasons they cast Harry Sullivan was because they were considering an older Doctor like the first Doctor. So he would have taken the same role. And in this episode, Ian is helping carry people. He at one point offers to help carry the Doctor back to the TARDIS, and the Doctor's very affronted at that. But the Doctor can barely move at this point, so I mean, he doesn't have too much room to complain. I mean, the Doctor, it wasn't completely his fault, but they are in a horrible situation. Very threatening situation that they would not have been in if it wasn't for, well, honestly, it's really more Susan's fault than anything, but there was nothing that anybody in the group planned to happen. But certainly, the people least at fault were Barbara and Ian.
Yeah, and Ian may have been the muscle, and of course, being a science teacher, he knows things more than what I might know. But the Doctor brings with him, when he wants to, when he's not all grouchy and uninterested in humanity, he brings with him a good logical sense. There's a good scene in the last episode in which an individual is accused of murder, and the Doctor sort of tricks the actual murderer into revealing that this guy's the murderer. It's a little bit of reverse psychology. That may not be, anything extraordinarily clever nowadays, but I thought it was sort of funny. And of course, these tribes people probably didn't have to deal with much of that type of thing. So it worked wonderfully for them. And of course, this murderer just reveals that he's a murderer in front of all of these people. Just wonderful scene.
Without even trying, the Doctor destroys him publicly in front of everybody. And that's the funny thing, the Doctor would be able to do so much in some of these situations if he actually wanted to try. But for half of this story, he didn't seem like he really wanted to, honestly.
The guy that he humiliates, saying that humiliate might be a bit weak, as he did prove that this guy killed someone. But that guy does come back in one of the final scenes of the story, and I think it's a really strong scene in which there's sort of an epic fight between the son of the fire maker and the hunter. They've been vying for control of this tribe, and the support both of them have had have sort of gone back and forth. These tribes people are not very consistent in their loyalty. They switch back and forth like something that switches a lot, like a light switch, like a loose light switch. That's what's going on, guys.
Yeah, horrible analogy aside, that is true. There's a scene where they switch back and forth between the two, I think 4 times in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's impressive. That's something you don't usually see, and I'm all for that. But yeah, this guy comes back, and this is an epic fight. And what makes this fight cool, I mean, it's just a sort of a generic struggle between two people with knives. Yeah, and what makes this fight cool is that at this point, I believe it's Ian had gotten the fire made. And of course, they're all in the Cave of Bones. The fire is flickering on the walls, and it's just an epic fight between these two men with knives. And the lighting from the fire, I think, really elevates that scene.
Yeah, it's cool to see. You see the shadows, of course, on the walls with the fires flickering. And furthermore, it's a pretty small cave. So Ian, the Doctor, Barbara, Susan, they're out trying to, like back against the wall so they don't get hit by any of these, swings of the hatchets.
They're like right in the thick of it.
Yeah, before they move over to the wall, they're literally right in, like one of them easily could have got nicked. Or worse.
And that's one of the final scenes, but even after that point, the Doctor and company are still trapped. Like I said, there's really no good sides between the two potential leaders. Either one would have screwed the Doctor over. So, of course, one of them wins, and hey, the tribe is a good leader, and it's all great. The Doctor's still trapped. So they do eventually find a way to get themselves out of the situation. I think it's a cool little scene.
Yeah, the nicest thing about the scene is everybody had done something at this point throughout the episode. Ian made the fire. Earlier on in the episode, Barbara did get the TARDIS group on the good side of one of the people, on a good enough side, because she helped, not heal, she's not, a healer, but she just used, some magical things she knew to help get a guy feeling better than he was, in a better condition than he had been in. And the Doctor, of course, was able to out one of the people in the tribe as a murderer. But the way that they get out, the idea came from Susan. She had been kind of hysterical a bit during this episode, and for good reason. Again, they were in a very dangerous situation. But she was able to come up with a pretty good idea, and because of her, they were able to escape.
Yeah, and the last scene of the episode. So, if you haven't seen Classic Who, a lot of episodes sort of bleed into the next story. So, for instance, the end of the moon base showed somebody being attacked by a giant claw, which led into then the macro tear. And I believe
which had the macro hoof giant class. And this mostly was true during the black and white era. It didn't happen, really, I don't think it happened out during anything past Portweed, did it?
well, technically Tom Baker's first season.
Yes, Tom Baker's fourth season, but besides Tom Baker's fourth season, I don't think it happened.
Yeah, so it was something that happened in Ollie Who, and I think it was sort of a nice thing. Like, I forget which story is before the Gunfighters. The whole reason the Gunfighters touts the doctor has a toothache and he's trying to find a dentist.
Well, the story is actually the Celestial Toymaker. And I don't remember where the doctor got a piece of candy, but the doctor got a piece of candy, and at the end of the Celestial Toymaker, I don't know, I hope he didn't bite into it, because, I think it's a hard candy, you don't bite those. But he pits into his mouth, and then he starts complaining about the toothache, and then it goes into the Gunfighters.
Yeah, and so this does much the same thing. At the end of this episode, they're trying to get back to present day England, at least present day for Ian and Barbara.
And I guess we did say before, the doctor, according to him, has absolutely no control over the TARDIS at this point.
Actually, now that you mentioned this, one important thing we did talk about. Once the TARDIS first gets to this area and they walk out of the TARDIS, the Doctor is surprised, very surprised, that the TARDIS did not change shape. Because what we now know is the chameleon circuit. It's supposed to change the TARDIS shape into something that fits with the environment. For instance, we see it used beautifully with the Master.
In the classic series, I don't think the Master's ever had a TARDIS in the new series. No, they never have they?
They mentioned the Master having a TARDIS in World Enough in Time, so in some capacity, I'm sure the Master has a TARDIS.
It's not coming to mind any time it actually appears. But yeah, anyway, during the classic series, when the Master showed up, he had a TARDIS that actually worked, it actually called, and changed and blend in.
And I think part of that, I believe the Master's TARDIS was a Type 70, whereas the Doctor's was a Type 40.
Yes, that sounds right, yeah, because apparently the Doctor stole we see that at the beginning of the name of the Doctor. He's stealing an older TARDIS that's being sent in for repairs, so...
Thank God Claire was there to help him, though.
Yeah.
God bless Claire and everything she's brought down for us. But anyhow, yeah, so now the sixth Doctor, Colin Baker, does eventually fix this for as long as it lasts, but he is able to fix the issue. Point being, though, the Doctor is surprised that the TARDIS did change. So up until that point, apparently he had an operational TARDIS and it just got stuck as a police box while he and Susan were in England for that time period.
Yeah, and I believe, I wouldn't want to be quoted on this, but I believe there's a 11th Doctor comic story that shows him, for some reason, breaking the chameleon circuit. I don't know the specifics, I only read it once somewhere, but I believe that's what I read.
You know that Matt Smith is a shifty one.
One could say that.
But anyhow, this episode leads into the next one. And I think it's a really good lead-in. Because they land on another planet, they're hoping it's Earth, or at least Ian and Barbara are hoping it's Earth. I think after the adventure, the Doctor would be willing to let them go. But they look outside at the scanner. That's what he calls a scanner. And the Doctor, it looks okay-ish. The Doctor asks Susan to check the radiation meter. And in another very strong episode ending, which leads into the next story. Susan looks at the radiation meter and it's fine, and then she looks away, and then the radiation meter starts creeping upward. And I think what works about it doesn't like spring up there automatically; it just starts slowly creeping up toward dangerous radiation levels. And I think it's just a great ending to the story.
Yeah, it's very ominous. It's very promising on what's coming up.
And if you guys know what's up next, it's the Daleks, and of course that's among the most famous stories of William Hartnell's time, for good reason.
Yes, for very good reason. It only introduces one of the most long-standing Doctor Who variants of our time.
And what I have to imagine is good merchandise for everybody who wants to make some coin.
This is also true. Because of the serialized nature of some of these early Who things, placing things on the personal timeline, which is a thing I like to do, is based on, of course, the TARDIS Wiki's placements, is usually pretty simple. The story right after this is, in fact, the Daleks, which is story number 2 of the classic series. Interestingly enough, before An Unearthly Child, there was a small e-book ebook. There's an e-story. It's a pretty short story. It's only like maybe 20 pages, called Doctor Who and the Horror of Coal Hill. And it was a small story that had the first Doctor going to Coal Hill looking for Susan. And it's on the portion of timeline. It's what takes place right before An Unearthly Child. I believe it's free from BBC. You can just look it up and you can get it legally for free. And it's a really cool cover. I haven't read it, but it looks like a fascinating small piece of history. I believe it came out 2017 or so.
Yeah, and actually that book, The Horror of Coal Hill, does sound sort of interesting. Like James said, it's a pretty short book. And we mentioned before that we want to cover all types of media here. So I have to imagine at some point there is something that we want to jump on. With everything said, I think An Unearthly Child is a pretty solid story for Doctor Who. Naturally, the first episode is a lot more iconic than the next three, but I actually think the whole story has a lot going for it. It might not always be the most engaging, but I think it's a good introduction to the characters of Ian and Barbara and Susan. And you can see the Doctor in his early stages, and if you keep watching the show, how he starts to maybe grow into a somewhat more heartwarming individual.
I must say, when I first saw An Unearthly Child, I was, like many other people, I mostly liked the first episode for the iconic nature and found the other three episodes rather dull. But upon a rewatch, as Michael said, one of these episodes was extremely dark, and as a whole, it was just a very grim story. There was no light-hearted fun had here by anyone in the story. No one was happy to be here. No one was having a good joy looking around, seeing, where the TARDIS brought them. They were in danger from the moment they got there to the moment they left. I could easily see Ian and Barbara being traumatized after this adventure. That's how bad this one was. And yet, overall, there's a big dissonance between the first episode and the other three, but that's how it's supposed to be. Ian and Barbara thrown into something they have no preparation for. And Susan and the Doctor weren't exactly expecting it either. So I think the story works out better than it had any right to. I think it's a pretty good story. It might not be the best classic Who. It might not even be the best black and white Who that you could find. But I think it stands out pretty well.
Yeah, it probably would even make my top 10 black and white Doctor Who stories.
I mean, it probably would make my top 10 Hartnell stories.
That I am not quite sure. Yeah, we're not saying it's a great story, but I do think it's a pretty good introduction to the concept, and I thought they did a pretty good job with what they had. So that has been our discussion on An Unearthly Child, and next up we are going back to New Who with the Unquiet Dead, somewhat of a more maybe forgotten episode of season 1, but it's episode 3 of the first season of the revival, and that should be a fun conversation. I am Michael.
And I am James.
And we have been the Brothers Mahoney. Hope you had a good time listening, and we will catch you all at a later date.